South Bronx, New York. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Real Estate Empire, stood frozen outside a crumbling apartment building that looked like it had survived a war. She'd come to fire the janitor who'd dared to reject her dinner invitation. But when the door opened, it wasn't Marcus who answered. It was three terrified children clutching each other like they were all they had left in the world. "Please, lady, don't take our daddy away," the youngest whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's all we got since Mama went to heaven." Behind them, in the one-bedroom apartment that smelled of black mold and broken dreams, Victoria saw something that shattered her. Marcus, the man who cleaned her marble floors worth $50,000 per square foot, was dividing a single can of soup into 4 bowls, making sure the kids got most of it. On the wall, a folded American flag in a triangle case. His wife, killed in Iraq, serving the country that had forgotten her family. The hero's widow's husband she'd tried to seduce with her wealth. The children who were about to lose the only parent they had left. Manhattan glittered like a broken mirror reflecting false promises. Each skyscraper a monument to dreams that died at ground level. From her corner office on the 67th floor of Sterling Tower, Victoria Sterling commanded an empire built on transforming undesirable neighborhoods into luxury developments. At 36, she'd inherited her father's real estate company and multiplied its worth tenfold by following one simple rule: never let emotion interfere with profit. Her marriage to Richard had been a merger disguised as romance, his political connections for her money. The divorce, 3 years later, had been just as calculated. She kept the business. He kept his Senate aspirations. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford, or so she told herself during the long nights in her Upper East Side penthouse, surrounded by art worth millions and silence worth nothing. Marcus Thompson had entered her life 8 months ago, hired through a cleaning service to maintain her office 3 nights a week. 34 years old, broad shoulders that spoke of manual labor long before this job, eyes the color of whiskey that never quite met hers. Not from deference, but from something else, something that both irritated and intrigued her. There was a dignity in how he worked, treating her Italian marble with the same care he'd probably show in a church. The attraction had crept up on her like rising water, slow but undeniable. Victoria Sterling didn't chase men. They chased her. But Marcus was different. He didn't seem to notice her Louboutins or her Cartier watch. He thanked her politely when she worked late, asked about her day with what seemed like genuine interest, then went back to his work as if she was just another person, not a billionaire who could buy and sell his entire neighborhood. She'd started small. Expensive coffee left accidentally where he'd find it. Bonuses slipped into his pay. Invitations to discuss additional work opportunities over dinner. He'd declined everything with a quiet firmness that drove her insane. No one said no to Victoria Sterling. No one. Last night had been her breaking point. She'd waited until he was cleaning her private bathroom, cornered him between the marble vanity and the gold fixture's shower. Her proposition had been explicit. She wanted him, could give him anything, could change his life with a single phone call. His response had been a look of such profound disappointment that it cut deeper than any insult. He'd told her he wasn't for sale, that he had responsibilities she couldn't understand, and that he'd rather starve than become what she was trying to make him. Then he'd left, his dignity intact and her ego in ruins. The whiskey she'd drunk afterward, $1,000 bottles that tasted like failure, had fueled her rage. By morning, she'd decided, Marcus Thompson would learn what happened when someone humiliated Victoria Sterling. She wouldn't just fire him, she'd destroy him. Every cleaning company in New York would know his name, and not in a good way. She'd reduce him to begging, and then, when he was desperate enough, she'd make her offer again. Hunger had a way of adjusting moral standards. The address in his employment file led her to the South Bronx, a neighborhood she knew only as red zones on development maps, areas to be revitalized, which meant areas to be emptied of people like Marcus. The building looked condemned, graffiti covering bullet holes, stairs that reeked of urine and abandoned hope. She parked her Bentley, a mistake that would cost her 2 slashed tires, and climbed to the 5th floor. Apartment 5C. The door had been red once, now faded to the color of dried blood. She knocked with the authority of someone used to doors opening at her command. But it wasn't Marcus who opened it. 3 children stared at her with eyes too old for their young faces. The eldest, maybe 13, stood protectively in front of the younger 2. A boy around 9 and a girl who couldn't be more than 6. They wore clean but threadbare clothes, and there was something in their expression that Victoria recognized but couldn't immediately place. The same look she'd seen in documentaries about war zones. It was terror, pure, distilled terror of someone who knew adults could destroy everything in a heartbeat. The little girl spoke first, her voice a broken whisper that punched through Victoria's designer armor. Her small hands gripped Victoria's coat, like she could physically stop whatever was about to happen. The words tumbled out. Daddy worked so hard. They'd be good. They'd be quiet. Please don't make them leave. Please don't take Daddy away like the army took Mama. The apartment behind them told a story Victoria didn't want to read. One room serving as everything. Living room, bedroom, kitchen. Mattresses on the floor separated by sheets hung from rope. Black mold creeping up walls like cancer. A hot plate and mini fridge that constituted the entire kitchen. And there, hunched over a camp stove, Marcus carefully dividing a single can of soup into 4 bowls, watering it down to make it stretch, making sure the kids' bowls got all the chunks of vegetable while his was mostly broth. But it was the wall that broke something inside Victoria. Photos in cheap frames, but arranged with love. A woman in army dress uniform, beautiful and proud. The same woman in combat gear, surrounded by smiling Iraqi children. The woman again in a hospital bed, pale and thin, still managing to smile while holding her children. And finally, the folded flag in its triangle case, the gold star banner beneath it. A hero's death in a forgotten war. The boy, finding courage in Victoria's stunned silence, began to speak. His name was David, and he told her things no child should know. How Daddy worked 3 jobs but never complained. How he sometimes didn't eat so they could. How he stayed up all night when they were sick. How he cried when he thought they were asleep, looking at Mama's picture and promising her he'd keep them together no matter what. The girl, Jasmine, added her own observations with the brutal honesty of childhood. Daddy's hands were always cracked and bleeding from all the cleaning chemicals. He needed new shoes, but kept saying next month. He'd been saving for 2 years to buy David a computer for school, but something always came up. Her asthma medicine, Terrell's broken arm, the rent increase. Terrell, the 9-year-old, was silent, but his eyes spoke volumes. He watched Victoria like a guard dog, ready to defend his family against this well-dressed threat. Marcus finally noticed the silence and turned around. The expression on his face when he saw Victoria in his doorway was something she'd never forget. Not anger, not fear, but a bone-deep exhaustion mixed with resignation. He knew why she was there. He knew what it meant for his family. But he stood up straight, putting himself between her and his children, ready to face whatever came with the same dignity he brought to scrubbing her floors. Victoria stood frozen in the doorway, her prepared termination speech dissolving like sugar in rain. She watched Marcus gently guide his children back to their homework, sheets of paper carefully saved and reused, pencils worn down to nubs. He spoke to them softly, promises that everything would be okay, that Daddy would handle it, that they should focus on their studies because education was the only ladder out of this place. When he finally approached her, Victoria saw him clearly for the first time. Not the janitor she'd wanted to possess, but a father fighting a war against poverty with weapons made of pure will. His hands, she noticed now, were indeed cracked and scarred from industrial cleaners. His shoes were held together with duct tape painted black to hide the repairs. But his eyes, those whiskey eyes that had avoided hers for months, now met her gaze directly, proud and unbreaking, despite everything. He didn't apologize for rejecting her. He didn't beg for his job. He simply said he understood her position and asked for 1 week to find alternative employment, just enough time to ensure his children wouldn't go hungry during the transition. No anger, no bitterness, just the practical resignation of someone who'd been knocked down so many times that falling was familiar. Victoria heard herself speak, words she hadn't planned, questions about his wife, his life, his story. Marcus answered carefully at first, but as she sat on a rickety chair that groaned under her designer weight, something shifted. Maybe it was the way she actually listened, or how she didn't flinch when a cockroach scurried across the floor, or how she accepted the glass of water he offered, even though the tap ran brown for the first 10 seconds. The story came out in pieces, interrupted by children needing help with homework, by the rattling cough of a heating system that barely worked. Angela, his wife, had joined the army to pay for college, planning to become a teacher. She'd survived 2 tours in Afghanistan, only to die in Iraq when an IED hit the school she was helping to rebuild. A hero's death that came with a folded flag and a pension that didn't even cover rent in New York. Marcus had been a construction foreman before Angela died. Good money, honest work. But single fathers weren't reliable in construction. Too many sick days when kids got ill, inability to work overtime, the need to be home by 6 for dinner. Job after job disappeared, each new one paying less than the last, until he was grateful for night janitor positions that let him be home when the kids woke up and returned from school. And then Victoria learned the truth that shamed her most. Marcus had 2 degrees. Engineering from City College, an MBA from night school while Angela was deployed. Dreams of building affordable housing, of being the kind of developer who remembered where he came from. Dreams that died with his wife, buried under the weight of immediate survival. When David brought over his homework, advanced calculus that Marcus was checking despite having worked all night, Victoria saw the textbook was held together with tape, pages photocopied because they couldn't afford to buy it. The boy was brilliant, already accepted to Bronx science, but worried about the subway fare to get there. Jasmine showed her a drawing, expecting the polite disinterest adults usually showed. But Victoria really looked and saw talent that belonged in art school, not a crumbling apartment. The girl had drawn their building but transformed it into something beautiful, adding gardens where there was garbage, playground where dealers stood, hope where there was only decay. Terrell remained suspicious, watching Victoria like she might steal something. When she asked what he liked to do, he reluctantly showed her his notebook, stories he'd written, fantasies about kids whose parents came back from heaven, whose fathers didn't have to work 3 jobs, whose homes didn't have bars on the windows. The next morning, Victoria arrived at her office to find Marcus at his usual time, cleaning with the same meticulous care as always. He'd assumed their conversation in his apartment was his termination notice, but he'd shown up anyway to finish the week properly. That dedication to duty, despite everything, broke something in Victoria that had been frozen since her father died. She called him into her office, not as the billionaire to janitor.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
But as 2 humans who'd seen each other's truth. The offer she made left him speechless. She wanted him to run a new division of Sterling Enterprises focused on affordable housing, not charity, but sustainable business that recognized the brutal mathematics of poverty, that poor people paid more for worse housing because they had no choices. She'd researched through the night, found his college projects, his thesis on sustainable urban development that had won awards but never funding. She showed him developments in other cities that proved his theories could work, that profitable and humane weren't mutually exclusive. The salary she offered was 10 times what he made as a janitor. Full benefits, educational funds for the children, and immediate relocation to a company apartment in a neighborhood with good schools. Not charity, she insisted, but investment. She needed someone who understood both sides of the development equation. Someone who knew what it was like to need shelter, not just want better square footage. Marcus stared at the contracts, looking for the trap. Men like him didn't get opportunities like this. There was always a catch, always a price that revealed itself too late. But Victoria had learned from her mistakes. The contracts were clean, the offer genuine. The only condition was that he start immediately. They had a project in the Bronx that needed someone who understood the community from the inside. His pride fought with his desperation. Taking charity from the woman who'd propositioned him felt like selling something he couldn't get back. But then he thought of David's acceptance letter to Bronx Science, of Jasmine's art that deserved real supplies, of Terrell's stories that could flourish with a computer to write them on. Pride was a luxury single fathers couldn't afford. He accepted, but with conditions of his own. The developments would truly serve the community. No gentrification disguised as improvement. Locals would be hired for construction and maintenance. And there would be provisions for families like his, veterans' families who'd sacrificed everything and gotten nothing in return. Victoria agreed to everything, and when they shook hands, both felt the electricity of something beginning. Not romance, not yet, but possibility. The first months were brutal. The real estate world wasn't ready for Marcus Thompson, a black single father from the Bronx, sitting in boardrooms where million-dollar decisions were made between golf stories. Victoria's board was horrified, competitors laughed, and the media painted him as either a charity case or her boy toy. But Marcus had survived worse. He'd buried a wife, raised 3 kids alone, kept dignity in degradation. The old boys club of New York real estate didn't scare him. He faced them with unshakable competence, innovative proposals, and the quiet strength of someone who'd already lost everything and survived. The first project was in his old neighborhood. 200 units of affordable housing that looked like they belonged in Manhattan, not the Bronx. Sustainable materials that lowered utility costs, designs that maximized light and space, community gardens that gave residents ownership, not just occupancy. The cost per unit was half the standard, the quality double. Victoria watched him work with growing admiration. The man she'd wanted to possess had become someone who inspired her. She began seeing her projects not as numbers on spreadsheets, but as families' futures. For the first time since her father's death, she felt purpose beyond profit. The children began thriving in their new schools. David's brilliance in mathematics was finally matched with resources. Jasmine's art teacher recognized her talent and started preparing her for specialized programs. Terrell's writing flourished with access to computers and books. They visited the Sterling offices after school, transforming the sterile corporate environment with their laughter and energy. It was Jasmine who said what everyone could see, but no one dared voice. One afternoon, while Victoria was teaching her to use design software, she asked innocently, "Miss Victoria, are you going to marry Daddy? Because you look at him the way Mama used to in the videos." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus froze mid-sentence in his presentation. Victoria's face flushed red, but Jasmine continued, 6-year-old wisdom undeterred. "And Daddy smiles now? Real smiles? Not the pretend ones he does when he's sad, but doesn't want us to worry." Dirty? The truth spoken by a child changed the dynamic but not the partnership. Marcus and Victoria continued working together, but now there was an awareness, a tension that went beyond professional. Late nights planning projects became conversations about dreams, fears, and the loneliness of being strong for everyone else. Victoria told him about her father, a self-made man who'd taught her that love was weakness, that the only thing you could count on was money. About her mother who'd drunk herself to death in their Long Island mansion, surrounded by wealth but empty of warmth. Marcus spoke of Angela, the love they'd shared, the guilt of moving on, the fear that loving again was betraying her memory. The turning point came during the groundbreaking ceremony for the Bronx development. Hundreds of families receiving keys to homes that respected their humanity, children playing in safe spaces, elderly residents crying with joy over apartments that didn't leak, weren't infested, where heat worked and windows locked. Victoria was giving the speech when her voice broke. She saw a family in the crowd, single father, 3 kids, exhausted eyes, and saw Marcus as he'd been that night, in apartment 5C. The trauma of that moment, the shame of what she'd almost done, overwhelmed her. Marcus stepped to the podium, took her hand in front of everyone, and finished the speech for her. He spoke about how Victoria Sterling had given him a chance when no one else would, how she'd seen potential where others saw problems, how she'd transformed not just buildings, but lives. He spoke about second chances, about bridges between worlds, about love that grew from respect rather than desire. The declaration shifted something in New York's power structure. The media exploded. The board threatened rebellion. Her ex-husband Richard appeared attempting to claim credit for her success. But in the chaos, Marcus and Victoria found peace they'd never known. It wasn't the passionate love Marcus had shared with Angela. It was something different, built on partnership, shared goals, mutual respect that had grown into something deeper. The children accepted Victoria gradually, not as a replacement for their mother. That position was sacred, but as someone new in their lives. David found in her a mentor for business and strategy. Jasmine discovered an art patron who never questioned expenses for supplies. Terrell simply found another adult to love with the fearlessness of a child who'd learned that love was precious precisely because it could be lost. Angela's mother, Dorothy, was the last holdout. But when Victoria paid for experimental treatments that gave her 2 more years with her grandchildren, when she saw Victoria hold Marcus through nightmares about IEDs and folded flags, when she heard her promise Angela's picture that she'd protect this family with her life, then and only then did she give her blessing. 3 years after that first visit to the South Bronx, New York had changed. Sterling Enterprises led the nation in sustainable, affordable housing, copied but never equaled. Marcus had been named Developer of the Year, the first time the award went to affordable housing instead of luxury towers. Victoria had discovered that wealth with purpose was infinitely more satisfying than profit alone. The wedding was simple, held in the community center of the first development they'd built together. No celebrities or politicians, just families living in homes Marcus had designed, children playing in gardens Victoria had funded, elderly residents whose dignity had been restored by their partnership. Victoria wore blue, not white. She'd had her white wedding with Richard, and that belonged to the past. Marcus's children walked her down the aisle, not giving her away, but welcoming her officially into the family she'd already joined. Jasmine was the flower girl, creating art with petals. David carried the rings, having calculated the optimal walking speed for maximum dramatic effect. Terrell read a story he'd written about families that choose each other. Richard appeared at the reception, uninvited but not turned away. His political career had crashed after a corruption scandal, and he approached Victoria with his trademark arrogance diminished. "You found something with him I could never give you," he admitted. "Someone who sees you, not your bank account. Don't fuck it up like I did." The real surprise came from apartment 5C. The old neighbors, the ones who'd watched Marcus struggle, had pooled resources. Not money. They knew that wasn't needed anymore, but something more valuable. They'd collected stories of all the times Marcus had helped when he had nothing to give. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose groceries he carried despite working 3 jobs. Young Mike, who he'd tutored in math even when exhausted. the homeless vet he'd shared his lunch with every day for a year. Stories of wealth that had nothing to do with money. Victoria's office in Sterling Tower had been transformed. Where once cold marble reflected ambition, now children's artwork covered walls. Architectural models of future communities cluttered every surface, and photos of families in their new homes made it feel alive. Marcus entered with their 2-year-old daughter balanced on his hip, Angela, named for the hero who'd made their family possible. The little girl had Victoria's green eyes and Marcus's determined chin, a combination that promised beautiful trouble ahead. The older children had flourished. David, now 18, heading to MIT on full scholarship, but planning to return and revolutionize urban planning. Jasmine, 16, whose art already sold in galleries, with proceeds going to community programs. Terrell, 14, whose blog about blended families and second chances had gone viral, landing him a book deal he was too young to fully appreciate. Victoria was presenting the new project to the board. Entire communities designed for veterans' families, recognizing that those who served deserved more than flags and empty thanks. The numbers proved it was profitable, sustainable, revolutionary. As she spoke, Marcus watched the woman who'd once tried to buy him, then tried to fire him, then saved him, then loved him. He saw not the billionaire who'd shown up at his door with termination in her eyes, but the partner who'd learned that true wealth was measured in lives changed, dignity restored, futures made possible. That evening, returning home, not the sterile Upper East Side penthouse, but a brownstone in the Bronx, in the neighborhood they'd rebuilt together, they passed the old building where apartment 5C had been. It had been renovated as part of their program, but 5C was preserved as a museum of resilience. A plaque by the door read, "Here lived Marcus Thompson, who taught New York that dignity doesn't have a price tag, and Victoria Sterling Thompson, who learned that love can't be bought, only earned." But for Victoria, the real lesson was different. That door had taught her that sometimes you have to descend into someone else's hell to understand what heaven really means. That wealth without purpose is poverty with nice shoes. And that love, real love, isn't about possession or power. It's about seeing someone struggle and choosing to struggle alongside them. Little Angela pointed at the door and said her first complete sentence, "Daddy's old home." And in a way, she was right. It wasn't just where Marcus had lived. It was where Victoria had learned to live. The circle had closed. The millionaire who'd gone to the janitor's home to destroy him had instead found her salvation. And the janitor who'd feared losing everything had gained not just financial security, but the chance to reshape a city, one family at a time. New York glittered in the twilight, unaware that its transformation had begun in a one-room apartment in the South Bronx, where a man had chosen dignity over desperation, and a woman had chosen humanity over profit. Sometimes revolutions begin like that, not with press conferences or ribbon cuttings, but with the simple act of seeing another human being's truth and deciding they deserve more. Much more. If this story touched your heart, leave a like to support stories of redemption and transformation. Comment with the moment that moved you most. Share with those who need to believe in second chances. Subscribe for more stories that prove love can bloom in the most unexpected places. Remember, sometimes those with the least to give are the ones who give the most. Sometimes true wealth is found in the poorest places. And sometimes one moment of real sight can change not just 2 lives, but an entire city's destiny. Have you ever looked beyond appearances and discovered something extraordinary? Tell us in the comments.